Hello, everyone. I'm Alicia Malone. Welcome back to TCM for more of our look at the studio system and the history of Warner Brothers. I'm joined again by film historian Mark Harris. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. And the host of KCRW's The Business, Kim Masters. Hi.
Oh, what a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So let's dig in more to the history of Warner Brothers. And Mark, at the time of the movie that we're about to watch, The Maltese Falcon, 1941, Jack Warner is the head of the California Productions, and working alongside him was Hal Wallace. So how did these two work together? Was it about, Jack Warner taking the business side and Hal Wallace doing more of the filmmaking side? Because Hal Wallace really knew films, didn't he?
Right. Well, so many of these studio heads had one kind of especially trusted lieutenant. For Louis B. Mayer, it was Irving Thalberg, and for Jack Warner, it was definitely Hal Wallace. I think the credit that you would often see for him was executive in charge of production, and it was because, as you said, he really knew production. He could kind of mediate in some ways between the artistic impulses of filmmakers and actors and the iron dictates of the studio head.
Yeah, so this is very different now, Kim, particularly at Warner Media, and TCM is part of Warner Media. What does the executive structure look like now?
Well, there is a Jason Kyler at the head, and then there is actually this question that is addressed then is also now, which is where do your executives come from, and do they have that creative feel? The people who run the divisions, like the parts of Warner Brothers that are about creating content, are still are really seen as creative types who have relationships. I'm not so much creative in terms of so hands-on, but who understand how to relate to the talent, the people who make the films, and have a conversation and have that touch. We are in this weird moment where the digital world is colliding with the old guard of Hollywood and the way things have always been done. And people from the digital world seem to have this notion like, we're going to reinvent the wheel. And as they get more immersed in the Hollywood way, I think they find out, and particularly I'm thinking of Netflix in this regard, that there was a reason for some of the ways that things were handled, some of the relationships, some of the niceties that make creative people do their best work. So we're going to see this bit of a battle as I think the digital people come in and either figure out how to adapt a little bit or possibly, spend themselves to death and die, honestly.
Yeah, and now, it was called Warner Brothers and it was very much a boys' club, but now we have quite a few women in charge.
Well, there has been still a struggle. Ann Sarnoff is the chairman of the Warner Brothers Film and TV Studio, but it's a pretty male-dominated world. Let me just put it that way.
Yeah, well, back in 1941, when this version of the Maltese Falcon was made, it was definitely a male-dominated studio. So, Mark, it's really interesting that this is based on the book by Dashiell Hammett, but it came out in 1929, and there were two other Maltese Falcon movies before this. And with this one, it was John Huston writing the script and also his directorial debut, but he didn't have a huge budget and he had to do it pretty quickly.
Right. I mean, one thing about studios back in the 1930s and early 40s that is really different from today is they would put out 50, 60, sometimes 80 movies a year. So everything didn't have time to be kind of fabulously curated, but also if you made a mistake, you could just try again. And as you said, this was Warner Brothers' third shot at the Maltese Falcon in just 10 years. The first two were not particularly successful, but they believed in the novel and the underlying property enough to say, well, maybe if we just get the right combination of talent, we can make this work. And one of the really exciting things about the movie to me is this was the first chance for a lot of people. It was the first chance for John Huston, who had been a contract writer, to direct. And it certainly wasn't the first chance for Humphrey Bogart to star in a movie, but Bogart was a star who had been under contract to Warner Brothers, and they couldn't ever quite seem to figure out what he was really good at. What was the thing transform him from a reliable actor into a movie star? Was he a romantic lead? Was he a jet setter? Was he good for comedies? Was he a bad guy? Was he a villain, a gangster? Finally, with the Maltese Falcon, they found what became a kind of signature role for him. They just were waiting for the alchemy that would combine him plus a good part into movie stardom, and this is the movie where they really found it.
Well, let's take a look. Also featuring the first chance for Sydney Greenstreet to be in a film role at the ripe old age of 61. Here it is, The Maltese Falcon. That was the Maltese Falcon, and joining me once again to talk more about the history of Warner Brothers is Kim Masters and Mark Harris. And Mark, you know, this film was an early film noir, but it seems like Dashiell Hammett's dialogue, the quips and the fast talking, and the character of Sam Spade being kind of a working class detective, it seems like it's perfect for Warner Brothers when you think about their 1930s films.
Right. It really is a movie with one foot in the 1930s and one foot in the 1940s. I mean, it does anticipate all of the great film noir that we really started to see after the end of the Second World War. But it also has this kind of jaunty, fun quality. It's a mystery, and it's a murder mystery, but it's not a really grim, bleak, the human condition is nothing but horrible mystery. It's a lot of fun. And, I get the sense, looking at the reviews of this movie when it came out, that even Warner Brothers really did not know what it had on its hands. The studio, back then, all the studios had really advanced publicity machines. They knew how to get the word out on their big pictures. And when you look at the reviews for The Maltese Falcon when it came out, they're all positive, and the tone is really not only this is so much fun and Bogart is a huge star and we just love this, but also, why didn't we know about this in advance? Why is this sort of being dumped into theaters without a lot of hype? There was a sense that Warner Brothers had made a better movie than it had understood that it had made. That sometimes happened during the 1930s and 1940s. With so many movies coming out of the studios every year, they didn't always know what their best ones were.
Yeah, Kim, how would you say that's changed now with Warner Media and their marketing?
It's funny because in the heyday, more recent heyday of Warner's a few years ago, there was sort of a joke in the industry that Warner's often made these great movies without quite understanding why they were great. That somehow this team of executives who ran it then, they did great work, and yet they seemed very kind of bread and butter, normal white bread kind of guys, and somehow they made these movies, and that was like a joke. Now, what we're seeing now is, they're just trying to figure out what sort of movies and budgets they can make in the world where the focus is so much on streaming. And what do you do with something that a great Warner Brothers property like the DC Comics characters, Batman? Do they need to be in theaters to have that kind of presentation and break through this enormous clutter now with all of these streamers coming into the field of play? How do you market in that world? And will people find the movie when it's not presented almost as a loss leader in some cases, because in the old days, which are seen to be ending, movies would go through phases. They'd play on your theater, they'd be available on demand, then they would go and you'd buy the DVD, there would be this process. And every time, it goes to cable, for example, every single time the studio gets money out of it. If you're putting them straight onto a streamer, there's a lot of question, what kind of movies work in that environment?
Yeah, Mark, would you say that the idea of curation is maybe more important now than ever with so much content?
Now if a studio releases 15 or 16 or 17 movies a year, that's a really big, healthy output. But that number is so low compared to what studios used to do. And it really means that there's very little opportunity to take a chance on something like The Maltese Falcon. We look at that movie now and we think, why would that even be considered a chance? It's a genre movie with stars, and it was based on a popular novel, but it would be in today's studio cosmos an exception. A modestly budgeted adaptation of a novel from 12 years earlier. That is not the kind of movie studios are currently in the business of making.
I mean, the upside to this streaming revolution might be that that is where people can, to some degree, take chances. Netflix will take a chance on somebody smaller and less known and throw it out there and see if that magic thing happens where people find it and get excited about it. But the question is, how many will find it? How will it be presented and promoted? And that is still something that's a tussle going on in Hollywood.
Well, Kim Masters and Mark Harris, you'll be joining me next week for night 2 of our Look at the Studio system. But thank you both so much for being here on TCM tonight.
Oh, what a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
And make sure all of you out there stay with us, because after the break, we have more from Warner Brothers with a very popular duo and a very popular swashbuckling movie.